I was breathless, my heart restless. Every turn felt like it was wrong, but I kept going to show I was strong. Pushing to my own song, but you came, you made me see the weight I put on me was too much, too tough to heal. I needed time, I needed to be every moment, breathing this moment. You came, you made me see the weight I put on me was too much, too tough to heal. I needed time, I needed to be still. this moment. Can we ride? Nothing's stopping us tonight. No, not a single brake light in our sight. In our way, I'll be your passenger. You lead the way. You lead the way. I'll let you take the wheel. I'm feeling something real. I need to feel that breeze rush your feeling. Not a single taillight in our sight. All I see are green lights ahead. Light it our way. Light it up our way, yeah. Light it up our way. Light it up our way. They light it up. They light it up. Can we drive right into this feeling? Can we drive? 'Cause there's a way I'm stopping tonight. No, not a single red light in our sight. In our way, yeah. I'll be our passenger. You lead the way. I'll let you take the wheel. I'm feeling something real. I need to feel that breeze rush over me. You lead the way. Not a single taillight in our sight. All I see are green lights ahead. Light it our way. Light it up, yeah. Light it away. All the green lights. Light it up now. All the green lights. I'll be your passenger. You lead the way. Are you happy now? Are you happy now? Are you happy now? stranger. Yeah. And I know they're just fragments of a world where your absence all I get to see. Take me back to the planet where you and I are still meant to be. 'Cause I'm in when you next to me. Yeah, I'm incomplete when you're by my side. When you wake up late. Yeah, I'm head.
VIP's alive.
I've been loving everything you are. Your eyes alone are the brightest star.
Let this be another knot to tie around my bed at night. I know I've lost the fight to erase your face, my mind. Awake, I lie here staring up beyond the sky. Oh.
Take a moment right here, feeling like it's out gear. Driving towards the sun with a rose and a gun. Feel the wind in my hair, going nowhere I swear. Like an outlaw on the run, dangerous but it's so fun. Running, running, no. Hold on, don't let go. Running, running, no. Keep running. Told my boss that I'm done. Had no luck with my mom. Say, what will you do with your life? it's hard to survive. A cigar in my mouth, maybe guilty but proud. Now I'm an outlaw on the run. Dangerous but it's so fun. Running, running low. Hold on, don't let go. Running, running low. Keep running low.
Let this be another knot to tie around my bed at night. I know I've lost the fight to erase your face, my mind. Awake, I lie here staring up beyond the sky. Oh. There's a distance between us. It's getting hard to reach out. Haven't seen you in seasons, but all I hear is your voice. I know my limits, you can break me down, but I'll stay till the finish line. And I've been counting minutes for quite some time now, just to see you again. And I've been counting days to get away, to see you again, see you again. Been finding ways to get away, to see you again, see you again. We got millions of reasons to let it all go. Hope we're not too broken. I know I'm not always strong. And I've been counting days to get away, to see you again, see you again.
We fell out of love like shooting stars, came crashing down, and we're building back up again now. I see your heart, see your mind, see all you hide. I won't let you go, can't let this die. When you lose yourself, I'll be right beside you. I see your heart, see your mind, see all you hide. I won't let you go, can't let this die. When you lose yourself, I'll be right beside you.
has given the best that he has.
I'll be right beside you.
wanted to run, we wanted to fall together. Back then our world seemed so clear. We grew so bright, shimmering lights around us. We take flight into the sky. How many worlds would you cross to use the light that's right in front of you? There is no light on the other side. I say, look straight ahead and you will see. You will see. You will see. How many worlds would you cross to use the light that's right in front of you? There is no light on the other side. I say, look straight ahead and you will see. Take my hand, I'll lead you on into the stars. We'll ride away from all the wars, close the doors and disappear again. And I don't know how many times I've said that this is not the end, and we will make it out of here alive. Oh, alive. Alive. Oh, alive. Alive. How many worlds would you cross to use the light that's right in front of you? There is no light on the other side. I say, look straight ahead and you will see. You will see. You will see. How many worlds would you cross to use the light that's right in front of you? There is no light on the other side. I say, look straight ahead and you will see. How many worlds would you cross to use the light that's right in front of you? There is no light on the other side. I say, look straight ahead and you will see. You will see.
And you make me feel like a rebel, but I will not give you a reason to destroy me more and more again and again. the memories and all the days we've spent together. You feel it's over soon, too many risks to take. Just let us see what we'll be finding. Hey, come with us and walk along the road, along the road. Everything we've done, everything to come, we will always hold together.
Our lips, they tasted like those cigarettes. Staring at the moon, we'd go to bed. In my arms, you're safe and sound, without a threat. And I can't wait to see what happens next. How far can we get if we sail a little bit high, a little bit low? How far can we get if we sail a little bit high, a little bit low? We're still a little bit young, but I'm all in. We're still a little bit dumb, but I'm all in. We're still a little bit young, but I'm all in. We're still a little bit dumb, but I'm all in. Our lips, they tasted like those cigarettes. Staring at the moon, we'd go to bed. In my arms, you're safe and sound, without a threat. And I can't wait to see what happens next. How far can we get if we sail a little bit high, a little bit low? How far can we get if we sail a little bit high, a little bit low? We're still a little bit young, but I'm all in. We're still a little bit dumb, but I'm all in. We're still a little bit young, but I'm all in. We're still a little bit dumb, but I'm all in. a little bit long. I need us to be a little bit high, a little bit long, completely alone.
And these nights are getting shorter, like a energy I'll conquer. In my soul, this is real. These nights are getting shorter. In my soul, this is real.
I'm wasted. My heart grows heavy. Don't taste me rushing. Keep your words naked. You got me blushing. And you forever I'll follow. You be my holy ground. You forever I'll follow. In immortality, I can see you and me. And you forever I'll follow. You'll be my holy ground. You forever I'll follow. In immortality, I can see you and me. You tears, so sincere, turn gray skies to blue. You won't ever change your ways, doing what you do.
Let's have a bit of fun till
YouTube doesn't tell you when my new videos are out unless you click that notification button.
We all
and
know
you're
Australia
subscribed.
is
So
the
be sure to do that. And please, click the like button, guys, to keep this channel growing. Thank you. Do werewolves exist? Maybe they are just legends that make great Hollywood monsters. But with things like this mysterious non-dog, non-wolf creature devouring people's livestock in Montana, just go to show you that new species can still be discovered and even created. You're watching Darkness Prevails, the best channel to share your real horror stories with the world, because this world is a strange one. Today, we're going over 5 allegedly true stories from people who claim to have encountered werewolves. Are these mythical creatures real? Are they simply a rare and dangerous animal? Or is it all a hoax? You decide. If you want your true story featured in a future video, you can send it in at darknessprevails.org/submit. I'm looking for UPS drivers' creepy stories. Now then, lock your windows up tight. You don't want something crawling inside. Number 1. Werewolf Encounter on Vacation. Submitted by Rayan. Every year on my summer holiday for the past 14 years now, I've been going to Ardèche in southern France. My family and I always stay on a camping site near an ancient little village in the mountains. It's one of those villages that slowly turned into a ghost town because most people moved to the city. Now, the people there are very kind, but one thing that actually amazed me is that almost all of them believed in the existence of werewolves, otherwise known as loup-garou in French. This might be because of the werewolf trials in France in the 17th century. Many people's lives were taken back then because they were accused of being werewolves. I like going to small villages like the one we camped near to. I often went there to take pictures of the beautiful old buildings, but when I came to know that these days, the people of the countryside were very heavy with their supernatural creature beliefs, I decided to ask one of the villagers if it was actually true, if they believed it as well, and why they did. The man I spoke to was very kind and open at first, but when I asked him if and why people here still believe in the existence of werewolves, he got awfully weird, and there was a serious and scared expression on his face. He replied that we shouldn't discuss this outside on the street. He led me over to his nearby backyard, away from the prying ears of his neighbors. When he got us both something to drink, he said with a timid voice, and said that the town had a strange secret since the Second World War. He told me that what they believed to be a werewolf has been stalking around this village and the nearby countryside. He believes that it lives in this very village. He said that the beast had never attacked any people so far, but on the full moon, you can actually hear a sinister howling sound coming from the nearby woods, and that sometimes cattle had gone missing or had been found slaughtered. Since this area was part of a huge national park, so it wasn't strange that you could encounter some wildlife, like deer or boar on the road or near your own home. But the man said that everyone, or at least all the elderly people, have seen it and believe the town's secret to be true. Some rumors suppose that the werewolf had been heard or even seen inside the village itself. While I listened to the man's story, I thought about going through this village again at night to explore the edge of the woods. I wanted to know how true this was, wanted to know what they thought was terrorizing them since World War II. Was it simply a rare species of animal, or is it like the movie show, a werewolf that passes on its curse to someone else? I wasn't sure I believed any of it, but I wanted to. When the man was done with his story, I thanked him profusely for his time, and the drink he got me as well. Then I headed back to the campsite. That same night, I grabbed my flashlight, told my parents I was going on a late-night walk, and I walked over to the village. I remember that the moon was full that night, and when I walked through the silent village, everyone inside their homes as the streets were empty, I did suddenly hear a howl in the distance. I immediately stood frozen, my senses on high alert, realizing that though I'd come out here to explore and find something, I didn't actually believe I would see anything. The hair standing on the back of my neck and arms told me that I was regretting this situation already. For a few minutes after that, it was silent. Just when I thought it was a dog or maybe a wolf, I heard another howl. It was much closer now. But this howl was so sinister and weird. I could hear it better the closer it got, and it seemed to me to be unlike anything I'd ever heard. I wasn't sure if wolves even lived in the wild in France anymore, and I was beginning to get really anxious because the howling got closer with each call, almost like the thing had pinpointed me and was coming from my location. Now, I'm a bigger guy for my age, and I'd like to say that I'm pretty tough, but I'll be completely honest with you. I was nearly soiling myself at the sound of that howl closing in, and I don't remember a time when I was more scared. The only thing that kept me from hurrying back to camp was my curiosity, and you know how that saying goes. I'd heard of the loup-garou, but I also wanted to see one with my own eyes. Being skeptical about werewolves is one thing, but seeing something like that in real life, that would be thrilling, even though it's probably a terrible idea. Not even 5 minutes later, I heard the final howl. And when I saw a long and eerie shadow on the road in front of me, I nearly had a heart attack. The shadow was nothing more than a silhouette, as it was still dark. It looked like a rather large and bulky stray dog. I could see it there, its furry body and long snout. But it wasn't alone. There was another one slowly revealing its head behind a house nearby. This one also had the same pointy ears and bulky body build. Even on all fours, these things nearly stood at my elbow height. They stared at me for a while, until one of them lurched forward suddenly, toward the road I was on. I now had a closer look at the thing, at least one of them. Up close, it definitely looked more wolf-like, and now that its teeth were bared, I could see how big its teeth were. Its eyes reflected a cold ice blue in my flashlight, and its body seemed to be hunched down rather than just on all fours, more akin to a gorilla walking around rather than a canine, and I could see just how muscular the thing was, reminding me more of an athletic pit bull. I was frozen, and I was both amazed and scared. I remember thinking that you should never turn your back on a wild animal and start running away. So I simply began to walk backwards, slowly, staring into the eyes of the creature in front of me. But for every step I took, the thing took one as well, keeping pace with me and snarling. I walked a little faster, but as I was going downhill, I needed to watch my steps, because if I fell, those things would be on top of me, and I would be food in no time. The animal was still following me and snarling. I soon noticed that it was actually gaining on me. I began to panic, and I walked even faster. I knew better than to look away from it, though. I was nearly at the edge of the village now, and I grew a little excited, thinking I was nearly back to my family. But then I realized, outside the village, that would be an even better place for them to attack. Surely, though, if they wanted me, wouldn't they have gotten me already? Maybe I was just hoping it was being territorial and simply wanted me out of the town. When I finally passed the last buildings at the edge of the town, the creature halted and just stood still. I was overjoyed. Maybe they were just territorial. And where the village began, the animal's territory ended. But I didn't stop, and I didn't stop looking back at them. I simply backed away even faster than before. I kept watching the one that stood at the edge of the village staring back at me until I could no longer see it. And from that moment, I ran the 2.5 miles back to the camping site as quickly as I could, continuously looking behind me to see if I was being pursued. I blazed back to the camping site, and when I got back, I collapsed. I was exhausted, and my adrenaline had been pumping for so long. My parents asked me what was going on, why I'd come back running like the devil was after me. But since I knew my dad wouldn't believe my story, I ended up telling my mom what had happened. I was in disbelief of my own situation, so it kind of comforted me when she confirmed that she had heard a creepy howling coming from the woods. Even my dad said he had heard it too. That night, I could barely sleep after what had happened, and the following day I went back to the village to see the man, the guy who told me the story originally. When he opened the door, I told him that I had to tell him a story. We sat down in the backyard again, and I told him what happened the previous night. He listened closely to me, and after I finished the story, the man admitted that he already knew, because he and a number of the other villagers from their homes had watched the scene unfold. Number 2. Werewolf at My Mom's House, submitted by NovaCat12. We lived in southern Arkansas in Dallas County. Since my parents had been divorced since I was 3, I lived with my father. I asked if we could go over to my mom's house one Saturday, and my dad said yes. So I went over to my mom's place to spend some time with her and chat. We hung out, and later that night, her and some friends decided to play some Dungeons & Dragons. We played for around 2 hours. My mom's place can get pretty hot, so I asked her at one point if I could go outside to cool off. She said that I could, and we could pause the game for the time I was outside, make it a little break time. Now, my mom lives in the countryside in Arkansas River Valley, a few hours from where I live. Near her place, there's this dirt trail to the front of her house. At the time, it must have been 11:30, but I can't be sure. I decided to walk that trail for a few minutes. I walked for about 20 minutes in all, but about 10 minutes into the walk, I heard a stick or a twig break behind me. I was startled, and I turned but didn't see anything. So after a moment of silence, I kept on walking down the path. I didn't hear anything for another 6 minutes, but this time, it sounded much closer. I was startled again, and I was beginning to get creeped out, so I decided maybe it was time to get back to my house. A few seconds going back, I saw something in the middle of the road. I don't think it saw me, and I was glad that it didn't. The thing was on all fours at the time, but still stood at about 5 feet tall. Its legs were bent back like the ones of a dog or cat's would be, and from what I could see from the moon behind the clouds, it had a reddish-brown fur color. Its torso and arms were shaped like an adult man, and it had the head of a German shepherd, yet bigger and much bulkier. I don't really know why I stood there for so long, just looking at the beast, instead of running away. But due to its appearance, one thing came to me right away: the word werewolf. After I observed it, I tried to sneak away, and I wasn't paying any attention to where I was walking, and ended up stepping on a fallen branch. When I did, the creature turned to look at me, and it stood straight up on its hind legs. At that point, it was easily 7 feet tall. Its eyes were yellow-green in color, from what I could see from the moonlight, and I didn't know what I was going to do. The only thing I could do was run, but you should never run from a predator that size. I knew better than that. Yet I was still terrified, and I did what my body told me to. I ran as fast as I possibly could. The creature growled from behind me, and I heard something heavy crashing through the woods behind me. It drew closer to me at an amazing, unnatural speed. Just when I thought I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, it stopped. When I made it out of the trail, I dared to look back, and I saw it there standing straight up and looking at something in the distance. Apparently something else had made it more curious and interested than me. It didn't pay me any mind and simply left, and I went back to running, making it home in only a few minutes. When I got inside, my mom asked me what was wrong, why I was crying. I told her I went for a walk and then a run down the path, and that the wind had forced tears out of my eyes. She said that was fine, though she was still suspicious in her voice. We resumed our game. Later on, after everyone went home, she grabbed my shoulder and asked what really happened, but I stuck to my story, ignoring her endearing, suspicious glances. She told me to never go back on that path again. She knew something had happened. Number 3. Something at my window. Submitted by Xander C. I was 11 at the time, and I lived in a small cabin by a stretch of woods. My cousins wanted to play some hide and seek and tag in the woods one day, and my house was right at the base of these woods. My mom and dad had left for the night, so we were home to ourselves. We all went out to play hide and seek. Then it happened. It started when my youngest cousin, Mike, was seeking. We went to hide, and he began counting. But after about an hour passed, with dead silence, we decided to head back home, wondering what had happened to Mike. While walking home, we heard the most blood-curdling howl we'd ever heard, and decided to book it back to the house, which was about 30 yards away. About halfway back, we suddenly heard some heavy footsteps gaining on us from behind. When we opened the front door, we slammed it shut almost instantly, then looked at each other absolutely mortified, thinking, what in the world was that? And then we realized that Anne, my other cousin, was still out there. I was seconds away from crying when Anne herself started knocking at the door and screaming to be let in. We did so and immediately locked the door behind her. Anne was already crying. I pleaded with her, wanting to know what was wrong, but she said nothing, a terrible expression on her face. My younger cousin had said, "Look at the window. There's something out there." We stayed at our spots distant from the window, but we stared at it, and soon something stared back. There were eyes, red eyes, attached to a figure that appeared to be bending down and peering through the window. We ran upstairs and into my room, locking each and every door behind us. When we got to my room, we heard this heavy thumping sound on the roof, and we were all crying by then. We were so terrified that I ended up calling the cops. An hour later, we saw headlights pull up in the driveway, but this was long after the sounds had died off. When we told the cops our story, boy did we get the chewing out of a lifetime. We were accused of lying, and said they were forced to tell my parents what happened. I got in a lot of trouble over that, but I'd rather be grounded for life rather than being eaten by something that was peering into my window at night. Number 4. The Rocky Mount, Virginia Dogman of Winter 2009. Submitted by James. The story I'm about to tell you takes place about 8 years ago, back in the summer of 2009, when I was only 15 years old. As a 15-year-old, I was pretty quiet, and even selectively mute. I kept to myself because it was always difficult for me to deeply connect with other people, and to be accepted by them, due to the fact that my ideology was labeled as eccentric, because I always deferred from the rest as if I was trying to argue, but that was simply how I expressed myself. As for my hobbies, they just simply weren't appreciated by everyone, so I didn't really have any friends. You could say I was ostracized and exiled, some sort of outcast of my age group, a misfit inside and out of my home and society. So with that being said, I guess you can assume that I avoided others. I stuck to isolating and alienating myself from other people. It was the only way I could have a peace of mind, some individualism and independence, and freedom for that matter. In fact, solitude always brought me some level of comfort, as long as I felt free. At that time, I lived with my mother, Bonnie, and my twin brother, Jared. I was attending Franklin County High School, and I had recently gotten my first job as a youth worker after my mentor referred me to my county's local Goodwill Industries of the Valleys, which was a government-funded program for disadvantaged youth. I worked for Goodwill for roughly a year before I was terminated due to the funding of the program expiring. Our responsibilities and duties consisted of things ranging from warehouse work, such as taking in and organizing donated clothes and merchandise, doing inventory, stocking, zoning, cleaning, and other days we would carpool out into the neighborhood and participate in community construction projects. All in all, they kept us very busy. One winter evening, the sun was setting, and we were finishing up carving an elderly woman's driveway, freeing up the thicket of snow that had accumulated prior from that night's snowfall. That day, the group of workers consisted of myself, my twin brother, and a number of male and female peers of mine that were mutual students from the high school. The group consisted of about 5 or 6 people, excluding other Goodwill staff members. I was positioned in the back near the woods by myself, with my twin brother in the front, and our other group member on the far side of the house, further ahead of where I was. After about 15 to 20 minutes had passed of shoveling and chucking snow to carve somewhat a decent path, I heard a twig crack in half very loudly. I knew something was moving around behind me in the brush, making the brush and the bushes behind me rustle, as if something was treading through them while entangled, trying to get itself free. Having the rational mentality that I had back then, I assumed that it was a neighborhood dog, or something from the owners of the home or a nearby neighbor. When I looked behind me to see the source of the sound, I immediately dropped my shovel out of shock. My blood ran cold, and I felt a fluttery sensation in my chest that rose up in my throat, as if I was choking on my pounding heart. I met the golden glinted glare of a tall and lanky figure that had the body of a grizzly bear and the head of a dog. It was covered in matted jet black fur with dagger-like teeth and a set of large fangs bared. Its snout was tensed and its eyes were squinted, giving me an angry and hideous look of hostility, as if it wanted to rip me to shreds right then, right there. But it did nothing. It simply stared at me, not moving a muscle. The figure stood on its hind legs from its crouching position, and I swear it measured up to about 8 or 9 feet tall. I saw it open its maw as if it were about to speak. I swear I saw it mouth something, like a human would. And with that, the figure fled back to where it came, out of sight, but not out of mind. For the rest of that day, that scene replayed itself. I could almost hear its voice in my head, a deep, guttural, demonic, cold, rattling thing that sounded long expired and dried up. I never told anyone about what had happened that night, about what I had experienced. I feel I don't need to. No one would have believed me anyway. This may be something that I take to my grave. And number 5, My Dogman Encounter, submitted by Gavin C. I'll admit it, I'm a paranormal and monster fanatic. I read and listen to a whole bunch of scary stories, and I also watch some of the lost tapes every now and then, and never fail to enjoy myself. I know if I shared this story with anyone else, they wouldn't believe me and they would say it's just from those stupid shows I always watch. But this is far more than my imagination. In fact, it's not my imagination at all. This happened 2018, March 9th. We have a chicken coop out at our place in a small town in Nebraska, and every night I go out to shut them up so nothing gets in there. We have around 27 chickens, and we lose maybe one a year due to weather or the chickens just pecking at each other. Overall, it's not so bad. Whenever we do lose a chicken, we throw it into the tree pile behind the coop. The bodies will normally get picked up by a coyote after a few days, or some other scavenger. Well, one morning I saw that we had just lost a chicken, so I threw it in the usual pile after I finished feeding and watering the rest. Later that day, when it got dark, I went out to do my normal nightly routine. That night, there were coyotes in the cornfield across the road, as there usually were. So I went out, and I always have my LED flashlight with me, so I turned it on and headed over to the coop. As I was walking out to the chicken coop, the coyotes yelped, then went silent, and so did my dog, who was usually going insane because of the coyotes. I was a little bit freaked out, but I kept on going to the chicken coop, at least to just get it over with. I shut everything up. I was just about to get my dog and head to the house, finally done with everything. But then I heard something moving behind the chicken coop. I figured it was a cat or a coyote getting a little too close, so I went over to scare it off. I didn't want to lose any more chickens. But as I walked up, I could hear something growling and more movement. Then I heard a terrible sound, the sound of flesh being ripped from bone. I ran behind the chicken coop. Bad idea. When I rounded the corner, I immediately froze, and there was a figure taller than I was, a creature that had managed to grab one of the chickens before I shut the door. The thing was huge in terms of muscle, like my football coach, but taller, minus the coyote-looking head that it had. Its eyes were yellow, and they seemed to glow in the moonlight. Its fur was brown, and it had 2 white patches on its eyes. It smelled like a mix between wet dog and skunk. Weird and awful. After a few seconds of just staring at it, it walked off into the woods, my chicken in hand, acting like I wasn't even there. Maybe I just wasn't worth its time. I ran back to the house and almost forgot my poor dog, which I grabbed, and when we got in the house, my mother asked why I was so frantic. I stuttered out an excuse, telling her that a coyote had grabbed a dead chicken out of the pile, and then I went to bed. I swear, though, I heard something just outside my window all night. At one point, I thought I saw those yellow, glowing eyes. The next morning, I was able to find some prints behind the coop. I did my chicken chores for the day and went with my dad out to the feedlot to help him. When we got back, we saw something large crossing the road and running into the forest, and that was the last I ever saw of it. Hopefully, the very last I'll ever see of it, whatever it really was. So you might not believe in werewolves. I can't blame you, but do you believe that werewolves exist? They just might. After all, this world is a strange one. In North America, probably the most commonly cited cryptid after Bigfoot is the dogman or werewolf. Whatever this creature really is, it is far more vicious than plain old Sasquatch. Imagine snarling, sharp teeth on a hulking form, almost twice your height. I think anyone would soil themselves after seeing something like that. Luckily for us, some people have shared their stories, so we don't have to go out and risk our throats being torn out. So enjoy these allegedly real sightings of werewolves and dogmen. Also, if you've got a story, we are looking for scary retell stories. You can send us your story today at deathbyfear.com. Thank you. Now get the dog whistle. It's time to piss off things that are far bigger than us. Number 1. The Dogman of Arkansas. Submitted by Eli. Back in the summer of 1995, I was 15 years old. I spent a lot of my time out at my grandparents' place in a very backwoods rural area, a little southeast of Little Rock. They lived down a series of dirt roads in the same house they had been in since my mom was a child, so the place was pretty ancient. The closest town was roughly 10 miles as the crow flies, and the nearest neighbor was around 2 miles up the road. I grew up in the woods, and my entire childhood was spent playing in them and hunting in them with my grandpa. By 15 years old, I was pretty well versed in the native wildlife. But this one evening in the summer of 1995, I saw something that would make me question everything I ever knew, and make me never want to return to the woods again. To begin, whenever I stayed with my grandparents, my grandfather had a very strict policy of being inside the house before nightfall. One evening, though, my cousin and I had strayed out a little too far, and soon darkness began to set on our way back. It was one of those evenings where the sky was red and orange, streaked with only a few clouds as the sun set and night began to take over. It wasn't quite dark and it wasn't quite light. It was that kind of in-between where the sun isn't all the way down and the sun was low on the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. That time just before night, when everything takes on a bit more of a sinister tone. Though nothing has seemingly changed from daylight, everything now seems more creepy. Soon we emerged from the woods. My grandfather had hunting dogs, and where we came out of the woods that night was an area across the open field behind my grandparents' house, next to the dog pen, and across from that an old barn. That barn was from an era of days gone by. It was no longer used and was falling apart. It was so old and in ruins that we were forbidden from entering it. Last thing we needed to do was step on a rusty nail or something. It was in that very spot that the way I looked at the world would be forever changed. As we neared that dog pen, we began to hear the sound of all of my grandpa's hunting dogs making quite the racket over something. As we approached, we could see them all looking towards that old barn, hackles raised, letting on that something was over in that direction. It was about this moment my nostrils were filled with the strong odor of wet dog, rotting animal, and urine. The smell was so powerful, it made me and my cousin both gag. Dumbfounded by the situation, I looked towards the barn, and what I saw is forever scarred into my mind. There was a creature there that only resembled a canine. It was peering at us from around the corner of the barn. It had one hand wrapped around the corner, and only the top half of it was exposed. It almost appeared to be grinning at us, revealing huge, sharp-looking teeth. To me, this thing looked more like a massive hyena in the face. It had very pointed ears that sat atop its head, and matted fur that kind of covered its head and chest very thick, similar to that of a lion's mane. Then that fur thinned out towards the chest area. It stepped out the rest of the way from around the corner, and the thing was walking upright, like a person, but it had the backwards jointed legs like a dog. Its hands resembled that of a human's, but reminded me of a raccoon's paws as well. It had claws, and its palms had what looked like the padding of a dog. Its arms stretched low, and it had some sort of a slumped-over posture. It looked like it was just as well at home walking on all fours as well as two legs. All in all, this creature was reddish-brown in color, and stood at the very least 7.5 feet tall, and it was built like a stack of bricks. We stood there too afraid, too intimidated and confused to move. At that point, we were in complete disbelief of what we were seeing. Then this thing, whatever it was, let out a growl so loud and deep, I could feel it reverberate in my bones. I had a handgun with me, but I didn't feel like it would be anywhere near enough to stop this thing if it ever came at us. I know you're not supposed to run from a predator, especially not so suddenly, but in that moment, it's exactly what my cousin and I both did. I felt like we had no other choice. We ran like the wind, blazing a trail of fire behind us. We made for my grandparents' house roughly 500 yards away. It was so far. If this thing wanted us, we would be dead. I heard that thing crashing through the field behind us, but I didn't dare turn to look. We burst through the door of my grandparents' house, and in a yammering of hyperactive gibberish, both of us were screaming, trying to explain to my grandpa what we had just seen, while I couldn't stop wondering how the hell we had made it home. It took us a long time to calm down, and when we did, my grandpa set us down, and he told us the reason why we weren't allowed outside after dark. The two of us listened, wide-eyed and transfixed. He said that a long time ago, whatever that thing was had come up around the house. It was looking in through the windows and was creeping around their property every night. He said he's seen it on other occasions, and that some years ago it had also killed several cattle, and on one specific evening, It had even chased him back to his truck. He said that the last thing it was friendly, and he was absolutely sure that it wasn't afraid of humans. Everything that I witnessed and learned that day has affected me. The dark and the forests and the night skies, they don't seem innocent anymore. I know what I saw, and so does my cousin. It wasn't some misidentified animal. It wasn't anything I've ever seen in my life before or since. This thing scared me so badly that I've never been back in those woods, and rarely do I venture into any woods under any circumstances, even if that experience did happen 22 years ago. People need to know that these things are real, that they're out there, and that they may not be friendly. Number 2. Werewolf Sighting, submitted by Anonymous. I live in the Netherlands in an outlying area. It's a place with big landscapes and farms. It was close to midnight, and I had to drive home. I was under 18, so I still used my bike. At the time, my parents weren't able to pick me up, so I just took a shortcut through the forest. I was reluctant to take that path, as it had always creeped me out. My mom said to never go there without my phone, because many accidents have happened along that path. So when I was going home, I got a really creepy vibe, and by that I mean it was creepier than usual. Something didn't feel right, and my body wanted to turn around and take the other way. It was a full moon, I remember it clearly, and it was a very beautiful night, but it was impossible for me to enjoy it. I never believed in werewolves or ghosts or anything like that before this, but halfway on that path, I saw something in a nearby meadow. I knew and still know the farmer that lives there, so I knew it'd be okay to go onto the property to get a better look. So that's what I did. What I saw there was a sheep, what used to be a sheep. It was completely torn to shreds. I thought that maybe a wild dog or a fox had done it, but it was really torn apart. There were pieces scattered about several meters in every direction, as if the thing had exploded. Immediately, I was scared, so I got back on my bike and pedaled a little bit faster to get home. I began to feel like I was being watched, though. I knew I wasn't alone out there. Then all the night sounds began to fade, the sounds of crickets and frogs and things like that, as if all these creatures were suddenly too afraid to be heard, as if they wanted to stay hidden from something. And that's when I heard the footsteps behind me on the path. More by instinct than curiosity, I found myself turning my head to see what it is. But what I saw forced my heart to sink, and I suddenly pedaled faster than I'd ever pedaled before. There was a figure in the road behind me. It towered above me, with pointed ears and glowing yellow eyes from the moonlight. It was on the road, right where the road meets that meadow. As I pedaled faster to get away from this thing, I glanced back again and saw it walking back towards the meadow, probably to finish the dinner that it had left behind. My heart was pounding so hard and fast, I honestly thought I was having a heart attack. The pain in my chest and the fatigue from pedaling so hard, I ended up collapsing when I got home. I told my mom everything that had happened and what I saw, and she shook her head and said that it was just a dog. The dogs kill a lot of things around here. But that wasn't right. A dog doesn't stand about 7 feet tall. A dog doesn't stand on 2 legs. The next day, I went to the farmer that owned that land. If he didn't know about the sheep, I wanted to let him know. If anything, maybe he would have some answers. When I got there, he denied that there was a dead sheep at all, so I thought maybe he hadn't seen it yet. So I led him to the spot in the meadow where I saw the sheep. But when we got there, it was gone. There wasn't even a trace of blood left. The farmer then told me himself that none of his sheep were missing, that if one of them had been hurt or killed, he would have known. Then he began to walk back to his house. This made me wonder, why was he so apprehensive about me helping him, about me telling him that something attacked his sheep? Better yet, where did the sheep go? Did this thing eat the entirety of the sheep's corpse? then lick every blade of grass clean of blood. That's impossible. I went home, but I didn't think much of it until I heard the other strange things about the farmer. You see, he's got a cage outside. A big, big cage. But he doesn't own any dogs or anything like that. I also haven't seen an ounce of silver in his home. But what I have gotten a glance of were the chains dangling from the wall of his room. What were those chains for? After talking about this with other people, I began to realize just how many sightings we've had here. Sightings along that same path, around the farmer's home, of a large creature that walked on 2 legs. I don't want to sound crazy or superstitious, but there's definitely something creepy going on. Number 3. Werewolf in My Garage. Submitted by Natalie B. I live in a rural area, somewhere between suburbia and the open mountains near Denver, Colorado, and there's a lot of wildlife in that area. I've seen bears and coyotes, mountain lions, and the occasional foxes, so if there's a more rational explanation for this, I'd like to hear it. I'm still scared of what I saw, so something more realistic would definitely be comforting. It was a few years back. I couldn't have been older than 14. I was a rebellious techie. I was up late one night with my laptop. The time was just past 1 in the morning, and my caffeine supply was running low. So naturally I headed for the garage to get a soda. We keep a fridge in the garage, and that fridge is closer to me than the one in the kitchen. I headed for the garage, and I made it to the doorway, eager for my drink, and then I opened the door. The light behind me in the hallway was on, but the garage was still very dark. Some light from behind me crept up into the garage, and it was reflected back by 2 suspended yellow orbs. They sat at the height of my stomach. I stared at them and nearly instantly realized that they were the eyes of something. I wasn't alone in the darkness of my garage, because only 4 feet in front of me, there was something that wasn't human. The eyes moved up, and the light from behind me began to reveal a good half of the creature's head. I only saw it for a moment, but as usual, with stories and experiences of something so traumatic, it seemed like an eternity. By the time I got a good look at the details of this creature, it had finished standing, and the eyes I saw before were now about 2.5 feet taller than me. It was definitely standing on hind legs. This creature had a long gray snout, tipped with a wet black nose. Below the eye exposed to the light, the flesh sagged and hung. Behind that eye, there was a pointed ear turned towards me. However, what I remember most were the long yellow fangs protruding from its mouth. They shone in the dim light, almost as brightly as its eyes. They were almost long enough to extend below the bottom jaw and were about the thickness of pencils at the base. I was absolutely petrified, especially considering I was just some scrawny 14-year-old who had no way of defending themselves beyond being hard to digest. So instinctively, I slammed the door and I half screamed, half howled in fear before putting my back to the door and holding it back with all my might. Only a second later did I hear claws scraping the concrete behind me. I dared not move. If I did, this thing could get in the house. Then not only me, but my whole family would be dead. Soon enough, my dad began rushing downstairs, followed by my tense dog and the rest of my confused family. When they found me, I was heaving and nearly sobbing. I collapsed to the floor, and I'm sure I was beyond hysterical and in tears. After I calmed down a bit, I said that I'd seen a bear in the garage, as that was the only thing I could think of other than werewolf, and I can guarantee you that the first word that came to mind when I saw this creature was werewolf. My family isn't superstitious beyond religion and such, so they would probably suspect I was on drugs or something if I told them what I actually saw. My dad and my dog made sure the creature was gone, while my mother and sister made sure I wasn't hurt. Luckily, I wasn't. I was just very, very scared. I slept with my sister that night, and it took me a long time still to finally fall asleep. After waking up and hoping it was a dream, I pulled myself out of bed and I started for the kitchen. Before I could reach the stairs, my dad stopped me. He said to me, "Your friend from last night was a pretty big bear." I froze. It hadn't been a dream. My dad showed me the garage. It was more than just torn up. It had been completely destroyed. The floor was strewn with claw marks. The workshop area was hanging from the wall, and half of it was on the floor. My dad made a point to show me what remained of the fridge. The soda cans had now become little more than shredded aluminum, and the beer bottles my dad was storing were now shattered. In particular, some of the cans had holes poked through them and were strewn across the entire garage. The fridge itself was sideways, and the door of it had been ripped off and thrown the other direction. I could barely breathe seeing such a sight. This creature had made short work of our garage. Imagine what it could have done to me if I hadn't closed the door in time. Ever since then, I've been terrified of going into the garage at night, and I've begun to believe in the supernatural. I always carry a military flashlight with me now, and I always make sure to have extra batteries. As a final word, be careful out there, especially at night. Number 4. Werewolf Encounter. Submitted by Fear Retracts. It was early December when me and a couple of friends were camping for a few days. My friend has an uncle who owns a cabin out in Alaska. Apparently, his grandfather built that cabin himself, and it was passed down in his family until finally it got to him. It was a small, beautiful place, consisting of one bedroom, one bathroom, and a small living space. His uncle had cleaned up the place a little bit, on the inside anyway. There was plenty of space in front of the house, so we decided to set up camp there. We were having a lot of fun, hiking, making s'mores, telling stories, but little did we know that this trip itself would become its own story. It was the third night of us staying there, and as we gathered around the campfire, his uncle wanted to tell us all a story. He began with, "I want to tell you all a story about something that happened here." All of us got comfortable in our chairs and were ready for a good story. He goes on to say that a young kid once got lost here, and he was accepted by a pack of wolves. He lived like them and did everything they did. My uncle explained that he even liked one of the female wolves in the pack. Eventually, they did somehow have a child. Now at this point, we were laughing around the campfire, as we all knew that this story was far from true. But the uncle ignored us, and he went on. He says that the child of the boy and the wolves still lives and that he patrols this territory every full moon. And it just so happened that when we looked up, there was a full moon in the sky, and a few of us chuckled again. After that, we called it a night and went to bed. We took it as a joke. We took it as a story that was supposed to be scary, but instead came off as silly. Besides, something like that doesn't even seem possible. I'm not one to believe in fairy tales. That night, though, we were suddenly awakened by a loud howl. It sounded way too close. It echoed all around us, and we began to panic. We armed ourselves with pocket knives and machetes. It was dark, and we could not tell where it was coming from. But soon, we could make out a figure that was standing over on a hill nearby. This figure was coming towards us. We started yelling for help, and in our panic, we were unable to exit the tent. I was sure that this chaos would ultimately be our doom. Soon, that thing was only about 15 yards away from the tent and getting closer by the second, and from this distance, I could see that it was huge, especially tall. But before it came closer, the door to the cabin nearby slammed open, and we suddenly heard the booming sound of a shotgun being fired. I watched as the thing's ears perked up, then it turned and ran on all fours away. When we all climbed out of the tent, we saw the uncle there with the shotgun. He looked at us serious, as if to say, "I told you so." But me, along with the rest of my friends, we couldn't speak a word. We stood there in silence and disbelief. We pretended to sleep in the cabin that night, and the moment the sun came up, we packed our stuff and we left. After that, we've never seen anything like that again. And number 5, Stalked by the Dog Man, submitted by Sean E. I live in a semi-rural area in the far north Queensland, just south of Cairns. The place is surrounded by dry bushland and rainforests as well as mountains. My mother and sister are both religious, more or less, and we do believe in creatures and manifestations that exist beyond our knowledge. My father and I, on the other hand, have always been the whatever, I'll have to see it to believe it types. This all started back when I was 17. It was a rainy night due to the torrential downpour of the wet season. It's especially bad in the tropics. Anyway, my friends and I were out longboarding around the block. We had just left my house and were approaching one of our favorite hills. Due to the weather, visibility was rather poor, and we couldn't see 5 feet in front of us. On the left-hand side, there was a half-acre block of land that was covered with tall grass. My friends decided they'd go first, while I was tying my laces. Although I couldn't see my friends, I could hear them going down, as longboards aren't exactly discreet. They reached the bottom and shouted the all clear for me. We had a system where the first ones down had to watch out for cars. Before setting off, I started to feel a little uneasy, like I was being watched, but I thought nothing more of it and I set off down the hill. About halfway down, though, I began to hear what sounded like footsteps behind me, or rather, thuds. It was like the sound you hear when a dog's paws hit the pavement mid-run, only it sounded heavier, much heavier. It continued down the hill after me, and at this point I was freaking out and I lost my focus. I turned to see what was coming after me, and to my horror, I was petrified to see a 7-foot-tall being with yellow glimmering eyes, pointed ears, and a grayish-black mane. This thing had its eyes locked into mine. The speed at which this thing was running was unlike any animal I've seen run before. While I was fixated on this creature, I paid little attention to what was happening in front of me, and my board hit a rock. I wiped out in the middle of the road. I managed to control my fall and I rolled, eventually stopping as I laid face down on the road. I feared that whatever was chasing me might be standing over me, so I mustered my courage to look up. I glanced over the corner of my arm, and I saw that whatever had been chasing me was gone. But I was still frozen there, mostly due to shock and disbelief. After about a minute of laying there on the road, my friends came back to see if I was okay. I could hear them cracking jokes about me eating the pavement on my fall, but I was in no mood for jokes. They helped me to my feet, and we just walked home, but I still felt like I was being watched after that. Even in the presence of my friends, I felt like I was being stalked. Upon arriving back at my house, I told my mom and dad about the whole ordeal, and as I expected, my father shrugged it off, saying, "Your mind is just playing tricks on you." However, my mom looked to believe me, but she didn't say much. Maybe she just figured that I had been chased by a dog or something. The rest of the night was pretty chill after that. I had a shower, cleaned up the grazes, and went to bed, but that was just the first encounter. The second encounter took place roughly a few days after the first. This time it happened while I was inside, in the kitchen. It was around 9 p.m. I was starting to wind down for the night as I had school the following day. While getting a drink from the fridge, I stared out the window. I have no idea why. I daydreamed off towards the streetlight on the back road behind my house. We have 2 driveways, one out the front and one out the back, that connects to the main street behind my house. During the day it gets pretty busy, as it's the main road in our area. So as I stared at the streetlight on the main road, my eye caught a glimpse of something standing directly under it. I focused on it for at least a minute or two, and managed to mentally record the following features. Much like before, it had those same distinctive large pointed ears. I took note of its muscular build on the chest and arms on this thing. It was heavy set, like a bodybuilder, and the legs kind of resembled that of a dog's hind legs. It gets better. The most screwed up part for me was its hands. It had ordinary hands, like opposable thumbs and all that, at least from what I could tell given the distance. I wanted to boil it down to a prankster screwing with me, if it hadn't been about 7.5 feet tall. This thing had one hand on the lamppost, and the other was sort of knuckled down on the ground. To me, it looked like it was having a rest or something. When the familiarization with this thing set in for me, I began to shake with fear, especially because, of course, when I decided to look it over, it turned its head to the house, and it looked back at me. For God's sakes, I noticed its ears had hunched up, and it seemed more alert now. Correct me if I'm wrong, usually in dogs it indicates full attention. I came to my senses, and I ran to lock the door. In sheer panic, I called out for my sister and my mom to come over. Dad, I'm pretty sure, was at work at the time. They came rushing in as I was freaking frantic about the whole thing. I told them exactly what I saw and as clearly as I could. But by the time we went out onto the balcony to look at the creature, it had vanished. At this point, I was pretty sure I was going crazy and starting to see things that weren't actually there. That was until the next 2 encounters I had in the weeks to follow. The third encounter was shorter than the others, but it was so freaking intense, it had me on edge for ages. It was the weekend, and my mom had decided to go into town with my sister. I decided to stay in for a night of gaming. I didn't mind being home alone. It started off as a pretty good night. I was going positive on Battlefield 4, so my mood was at a high. After about an hour of gaming, I began to hear a scratching noise outside my headset. I thought maybe my headset was playing up, so I took it off and the scratching became very apparent. It seemed to be coming from the stairs right outside the window. Just for your information, my window is about 8 to 9 feet off the ground. The only way you can look through it is if you're actually on the balcony. Our house is on a slope, so it has stilts, which is basically where my room is. This is how I was able to estimate the height of this being. Nervously, I looked up at my window, and there I saw those eyes, and those same pointed ears just rising centimeters away from the windowsill. This scared the hell out of me, and I was frozen again at the realization that this thing was right outside my bedroom window. It was taunting me. It was probably drawn to the sound of me talking to my friends online or something. All I know is this thing seemed to enjoy tormenting me. I buried my face into my pillow, and I sat on the floor, listening. I could hear it panting, much like a dog with subtle growling under its breath, and the stairs creaking under its weight. I shut my eyes, and after what seemed like a lifetime, the scratching finally stopped. Then I heard thudding across the lawn as it seemingly made its departure. I was able to pull my face from my pillow, but I stayed grounded on my bedroom floor. I didn't leave my room the whole night until my mom and sister came back at around 2 or 3 in the morning. My final and most recent encounter took place when my sister and I were driving on a secluded road, a road that led to the national park roughly 10 to 15 minutes down from my house. It was a nice afternoon. My sister and I are into photography. We thought it'd be a good idea to get some nice scenic shots out that way. However, this encounter didn't take place until we were on our way home. In fact, I'm not actually sure if this counts as an encounter, considering the possibility of misidentification. Well, we were heading back and just got into a windy section of road that takes us through the more dense parts in the bush. It's made up of tall trees, dense grassland, and shrubs. Not to mention it's also farmers' land, so it's pretty common to see a stray horse or cow across the road. As I was driving, I caught something moving amongst the grass out of the corner of my eye. It was something rather big. So I stopped the car and began to look at the area I thought I saw it move in. My sister, funnily enough, also saw something move, but to this day she still tells me she isn't sure entirely of what we saw. Out of extreme anxiety and the fact that she kept telling me to drive, we took off home and did not return for a while. It's been about a year since I've had these encounters. Things have gone quiet, But the thought of this thing sits in the back of my mind, whether or not I will see this creature again. Actually, come to think of it, yesterday my mom told me that she had a strange feeling of being watched while she was checking on our chickens in the backyard. Supposedly, something was spooking them in the night, so she went down with the torch, which is something she does all the time. But this time she found herself bolting back to the house due to feeling afraid and in danger. Honestly, I still wonder on how the situations could have changed depending on where I could have been in each of them. What would have happened if I was outside when that thing approached my window? I hate to think that this creature would cause me extreme harm or possibly death, but I do know that it was or is indeed a possibility. I still don't know to this day if what I saw was authentic or not. We've nicknamed it the Dog Man, but it's only after these encounters that I've learned from the online community that the Dog Man is apparently very much at large. Subscribe and comment on the video in the card above for a chance to win a $20 Amazon gift card at the end of the month. Beware the full moon. This world is a strange one. My favorite monsters are back and ready to hunt. Tonight I have for you some allegedly real stories of vicious werewolves. There are so many sightings of this same creature throughout the globe that people must be seeing something. But what is it? Is it the werewolf from Hollywood films, or simply some unknown creature with an insatiable appetite? Whatever it might be, the next time you're out and about, you might ask yourself, when will you encounter this fearsome beast? Before we start, I'm still looking for some longer Craigslist stories if anyone has them. Besides that, I would love to hear more McDonald's stories and Walmart stories as well. Send over any scary stories you might have at darknessprevails.org. Now, let's see what it's like to be eaten alive. Number 1. My Encounters with Werewolves. Submitted by Cheyenne H. I've seen 2 of them in my life. Things I believe were werewolves. The first when I was around the age of 14, and the other not too long ago. I live in the southern part of Kansas, so there's mostly just countryside where these sightings took place. As for my first encounter, I lived out in the countryside of Kingman County, where my closest neighbor was around a mile away. My parents would let me take nighttime walks during the summer, which was when this happened, the summer of 2012. I was on one of my routine walks down to the paved road about 1.5 miles away, then I would walk back. On the way down south to the paved road, there was a group of trees that always kinda scared the childish part of me. It was so dark, and you could always hear animals in there. Well, I would always jog past that part at night, then go along my way to the end of the dirt road. I remember running past this patch of trees, almost freezing when I heard what sounded like coyotes, and that's when I saw what I honestly thought was one of the nearby farmers doubled over in his field. It wasn't unusual for farmers to be out working at night. It was cooler than the day, that's for sure, so I slowed down to look over to see if he was alright. This figure, crouched down in the middle of a wheat field to my left, almost seemed to sense that I was watching it. I know this because it looked up directly at me, and I felt my heart start hammering in my chest, while these horrible, malevolent eyes began to glare at me. My body was screaming to run, just run the heck out of there and scream for help. But I couldn't move. You know how in the movies they always say how it feels, like you get frozen into ice, and you couldn't do anything but watch? That's not exactly what it was like. You see, it wouldn't know I was scared. I remember the thing stood, and it towered over me at about 6 or 7 feet tall. I mean, the field it stood in was at least 3 feet higher than the road, so I couldn't exactly tell what the height was for sure. I just couldn't take my eyes away from it, as I knew my impending death was sure to come. I just knew that they would find my body torn to shreds in the middle of this road, and that would be the end of Cheyenne as the world would know it. I've never been so scared. This werewolf took a couple of steps toward me, sniffing the warm breeze blowing from the south. Its eyes, a sickly yellow, still watched me standing there. It took another step before seeming to change its mind, and it got back on all fours and trotted to the patch of trees. I waited, petrified, my legs still screaming to run, while my brain told me to wait, told me it was a trap. So I waited, standing as still as possible, while my eyes scanned the trees in the field ahead. Minutes went by before my phone went off with a text message. I knew I was screwed if it was still there, so I took out my phone anyway and looked at the message. "When are you going to be back? I need help with laundry." I couldn't believe it. I had just survived meeting a werewolf, and now I was going back to do laundry when I got home. I turned and began the too long walk back home, about 1.25 miles, when I met the grove of trees I sprinted past, hoping that that creature wasn't still in there, watching me. Needless to say, I got home safe to help my mom with laundry. I never told her about my encounter, because I knew she would think I was a complete nut job. Now on to my second encounter. It took place on January 29th of 2017, around 3 in the morning. I live in Harper County, Kansas, with my husband. We were hanging out with his brother that night, playing Dungeons and Dragons. I know, yes, we're dorks, but it's our version of family fun. Well, around 2 a.m., I got cravings for ice cream, so we went to the next town over to Casey's to get some. The drive there was nice, with us singing along to music in the car. We ate our ice cream at the general store before heading back home. This time, instead of taking the highway, we went down the dirt roads. We went down one of the roads, 20th Avenue, for about 1 mile before I got this sick feeling in my stomach, like we were being followed. I knew there weren't any vehicles around because there were no lights at all, not even tail lights or brake lights, nothing. There was nobody around. So I turned and I started heading west for about 1 mile, but I still felt like there was something almost hunting us. So I turned, heading back south towards town on a dirt road that many people in our county call Whiskey Road. A lot of people believe that that road is cursed or haunted because of how many wrecks there are on that road and how many people have died there. Well, I figured since it goes straight to town, it would be our best bet. So we're going south for about 1/2 mile when I ask my husband, "Are the car doors locked?" Now, with our car, the doors don't always lock when you press the lock button. The only way to be sure is to try to open the doors. "I don't know," he replies. "Do you want to stop and check? I'll open the doors and close them again to be sure." I shook my head, looking in the rearview mirror as I pressed the lock button a few times. I see that my husband's brother, who's 13 years old, is passed out in the back seat. "What's wrong?" my husband asks. "I feel like we're being followed," I answer quietly. I don't want to wake his brother up and scare him, but not by a person. More like something supernatural, he says. Now you should know that my husband and I are Wiccans. We do believe in magic and spirits and supernatural beings. Though together we haven't seen much, we tend to keep that hidden because many people in our town would kinda go on a witch hunt if they knew. So it wasn't unusual for us to have a conversation like this. "Yeah," I answered, before tapping the brake to go over a bump in the intersection. I could see now, in the taillights, that there was something behind us in the dust. I couldn't quite make it out, but I knew what it was. I knew, from that moment almost 5 years ago, exactly what I was looking at. I had told my husband a few times before of my encounter with the above-mentioned werewolf. I told him how it felt, how it was real, how big it was, and how terrified I had been. My husband was looking at me, curious as to what I was seeing. "Werewolf," I whispered, tapping the brakes again to see if I could make it out any better. I could feel that it had moved. You know when sometimes you feel like you're being watched, you can feel what direction it's coming from. I felt exactly like that. I could feel where it was following us from. To the back of the vehicle, near the driver's side. My side. I could not see it in the taillights, so I kept going, speeding up. I was terrified, knowing that the road was dangerous because of how many wrecks happened. but knowing that if that thing caught us, it could be much, much worse. At the next intersection, I tapped the brakes again, making sure to check both ways for any other cars. I looked in the rearview mirror, and I saw it again, but only its back haunches. The legs were human-like, but the ankles and feet resembled that of a wolf or dog. The thing had knees and thighs and shins, but from the ankle on, it was all wolf. It was trying to hide in the dust, trying not to be seen, like a predator trying to get closer. My husband was worried, asking what we're going to do. I did not answer. I was too busy watching out the mirror and trying to watch the road at the same time. Can you see it? He asks. He sounds scared. It was behind us, I answer. We drive a little bit more, and I could feel it was back on my side of the car, but still a little bit behind. I was going around 40 to 45 miles per hour, so the fact that it was keeping up sent shivers down my spine. My head was pounding from all the pressure inside. With every brief glimpse that told me where it was, the fear inside me grew and was causing too much pressure to build up. I wanted to know more, to see exactly what it was doing, and to be sure of what it was. Like knowing a serial killer is in your house, but not knowing exactly where. I almost want to press the brakes to see if I can see it again, I whispered, eyes roaming both fields. But I don't want it to catch up to us. Don't, my husband said, head whipping back and forth, trying to catch a glimpse of this creature. I'll have to at the intersection so we don't flip, I said. I put pressure on the brake, eyes back on the mirror, and then I saw it. Front paws, more like hands with claws, to be honest, in the tall grass on the side of the road, while the rest of its body stretched across the dirt road. Its head was turned toward us, eyes piercing like I remembered the other ones being. It was massive, even as it stood on all fours. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, the way it stretched across the road like that, from one side to another. My husband only saw its haunches at that time, but later, the next time our lights went on, he saw its arms. Its front arms were huge, almost gorilla-like, with those bulky muscles that stood out on them. He says he saw its face at one point. It was almost human-like, if that's what you want to call it. It had the muzzle of a dog, but the eyes were definitely human. It had ears like a wolf, but they were laid back, like when a dog is angry. He believes now that those things were definitely out for blood. The way he saw its mouth open, but couldn't see its teeth. I wish I could say the same. Its teeth were huge. I saw it, even in the short glimpse I caught. We started to see the lights from town, and I sped up. I was going 50 now, and this thing was keeping up. I felt my blood pumping through my veins heatedly, too fast. I felt like I was either going to wreck or get eaten alive. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and I saw my husband's brother, still asleep through all of this terror. I couldn't let this thing get him. He was just a kid. So I kept driving, going 50 on a dangerous road, a road that everyone in the county would swear up and down was cursed. At the next intersection, I couldn't see it, but something told me it was on my side. Then it circled back and was on the other side. At one point, my husband and I both swore that it pulled back, almost like it stopped, before starting back up on the passenger side. Wherever it was, we could always feel it, this primal instinctual fear, a sense of location and doom that I'm sure all prey feel before they die. The edge of town grew closer, and I explained my plan to my husband. I'm not going straight home, okay? Why? If it's going to follow us, I want to try to throw it off our trail before we go home. Yeah, I don't want it following us there. What if it ate the cats? Well, it's not the cats that I'm worried about, I deadpanned. I'm talking best case scenario, he answers. The chills from fear seemed to gloss back over me. We got to the very northern edge of town, and the creature seemed to be pulling back, but it was still coming. It definitely didn't like the light, that's for sure. Eventually, about 3 blocks before Main Street, I couldn't see it anymore, let alone feel it. The beast was finally gone. Still, I told my husband, I'm almost afraid to leave the car when we get home. We locked up the house before we left. I'll go ahead and wake up Gunnar, he said. That's his brother. My husband reached the back seat and shook him awake. Hey, when I tell you to get out of the car, I want you to run to the house, okay? Okay, Gunnar said, his voice groggy with sleep, and he was obviously confused. I told my husband, give him the house key. He's the fastest. He'll be able to open the door the fastest. We parked the car in the driveway. Then we all got up and ran to the house. But I was wrong. It was a nightmare how long it took Gunnar to open the door. My husband and I stood with our backs to him, watching for that beast to show up. I had my car keys ready like a knife, and I finally heard the sweet sound of the lock of the door click before we walked inside. It took the whole night for us to calm down, and I really thought we were going to die out there, either from that beast or the road. I'm just glad that we lost track of it, and I hope we don't come across it again. I probably won't be going down dirt roads at night again anytime soon. Number 2. Arabian Werewolf. Submitted by iGhost343. This story took place in the winter of 2015, just outside of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I had been prepping for some off-road adventures with my 4x4 to the wadis of Saudi Arabia, just outside the capital of Riyadh with 3 friends. Now, many of you are already imagining things like oil, hot sand, riches, and Lambos, blazing sun, or even some other notoriety. But in reality, it's not like that at all. To begin with, most of Western media info regarding the Arab world is false. Believe me, I would be long gone if how they described it was true. Now, onto the story. I was off to the valley, or wadi, which lies outside of the city at the base of the plateau. We reached our destination by afternoon. We parked our car at least 20 meters away from the smooth and unstable edges, and we set up a picnic. The area there is flowery, flat, and rocky on one side, but deep, fear-inducingly high, and crappy on the other. The sun was absolutely blazing that day, but the humid winter winds cooled the land down. There were even heavy rain clouds that signaled future showers. A desert in winter is an unbelievable sight of fresh greenery and massive but short-lived lakes. After we ate lunch and had some desert fun, it was photography time. By now, afternoon had passed and evening was approaching. I told my friends that I'll catch a few more snapshots for another hour, which they agreed to. One of the girls, let's call her Eliza, joined me, bringing our Canon camera along. Down by the water, I snapped the scenery, the birds, or even the occasional fox. It was a good change of pace, as I was tired of capturing people in my pictures. Eliza, who I was personally close to, randomly captured me in a shot. I can't blame her happy personality. And just as I shrugged her off, she held my hand and stared me down, her eyes reflecting in the bright sun. She pushed up her sunglasses and my paint mask, and we had a bit of privacy. We walked back up the valley together, and that's when trouble struck. Something blocked the rocky path. It seemed to be some pale creature. Its limbs were long and hairless and bony. Its head was a long snout and tall ears, with a stature of 3 feet at the shoulders. As I got a better look at it, I could see glossy gray hair running halfway across its spine, and its eyes were very much human, with whites and clear blue pupils. It glared at us, a dead fox hanging from its salivating mouth. A mangy wolf? It seemed a bit bigger than that. A striped hyena? Too bizarre around here, but trying to be rational, I stuck with that. We were lost on what to do. Eliza hid behind me as I tried to scare it away by putting my backpack on my head, strapping up the mask, and breathing loudly and deeply. But no, it did something that burns my mind and thoughts. The thing stood up on its hind legs, like on stilts, like a hunched man on stilts, at 8 or 7 feet tall. The creature snarled at us, and my morale just dived to near zero. It took 2 massive steps forward, ignoring my threats and gestures. Eliza screamed, startling it and giving us a chance. Being the crazy guy that I am, I unfolded my tripod and lunged at the thing, staggering it backwards. This thing was aggressive, and we had no other choice. It was us or it. Then a bullet whizzed at the sky. The beast barked at me. Then it sprinted down the valley at inhuman, unnatural speed. It was a horrific sight. Then a local man stood on top of the path with a rifle in his hand. He led us to our car, watched over us, then told us all one thing: leave and don't come back. And we did. After seeing something like that, we listened. We drove off as fast as we could, with the man escorting us with his dogs and pickup truck. The whole thing was just bizarre and a bit life-changing. I've never seen anything like it in my life. You're free to doubt me, and I do too sometimes, but this just proves that there are more mysteries out there. An experience like this is one that I'll never forget, something that will stick in my nightmares. But honestly, someday, Beast, someday, I hope I see it again. Number 3. Werewolf at the train station. Submitted by Werewolf Engine Driver. Before I tell you my story, I will tell you some background about myself. I'm not from the USA, as you might think. I'm from Europe, from the Netherlands to be more precise. Normally I don't believe in such things as werewolves or ghosts, which isn't odd for a Dutchman. The Dutch are hard to convince of supernatural or mythical stuff like this. As for me, I love nature. I love photography, drawing, and writing. When the first snow had fallen here during the first week of January, I went to the woods near my house to take photos of the beautiful white landscape. I rode to the forest on my mountain bike. At the time, the sun would be setting in about half an hour, so I had to take my photos quickly. Here you're not allowed to be in the woods after sunset or before dawn, and you're not allowed to camp on the property. Each and every night, the gates close at the same time, right after sunset. When I arrived, I chained my bike to a tree and went on, walking and taking photos. All went just as planned, except I took a bit too long and did not get out in time. The sun was already out of the sky when I came back, and the forest slowly started to come to life. I saw deer, a fox, but then I saw something else, something dark and big, and when I looked closer, I thought it was a wolf or a wild dog. It had bright yellow eyes and two sharp white fangs sticking out from under the upper lip. I saw the head from profile, but its body was almost frontal view. It was then that I could tell this was no wolf, because it had the torso and the arms of a person, and the back legs, tail, and fur, of course, of a wolf. It looked like it was listening or looking for something. My heart seemed to stop, and I froze in place, completely and utterly petrified. This large creature stood not much more than 30 meters from me, and I hesitated whether to take a picture or just to run away. But if I took a photo, it'd be a once-in-a-lifetime thing, so I chose that. But the moment I raised the camera, the beast moved its ears, indicating that it had heard me. Then it turned its head right toward me. At that moment, my whole body wanted to give out. I thought I was going to die. For the first time in my life, I felt real, palpable dread. Its gaze met mine. That intense look. The creature stared right into my soul. At least, that's what it felt like. When it came closer to me, slowly and almost curiously, as if it had never seen a person before, there was no aggression, though that's what I had expected. Just curiosity. I was still frozen, and I could not move a muscle. The beast now stood less than 10 feet away from me. With no snarl on its face, it sniffed the air, probably smelling my scent. I hoped whatever it was didn't suddenly change its mood and would attack me, because I would definitely be finished then. By now, there was hardly any space between us. But the beast did nothing, and as quickly as I could blink, this creature jumped right at me, letting out a short and soft growl, almost like a threat, but oddly enough, it didn't bare its teeth. I took a step back, and it took a step forward. By now I knew if it wasn't going to kill me, it wanted me out of the woods. So I continued to walk back, facing it, until what felt like an eternity later, it finally turned around and ran away back into the now dark depths of the forest. I fell to the ground, knees hitting the dirt. I realized what I had just seen, a werewolf, to put it bluntly, and to think, if that creature had just been a little bit more hungry, I would have been dead. I stood up and ran back to my bike and unlocked it as fast as I could before that thing changed its mind. I raced back home, and I looked through all the pictures I took, hoping that I caught a glimpse of the creature by accident on different pictures, but there was nothing there. So instead, while it was fresh in my mind, I decided to draw what I saw. And ever since then, I haven't been back, and I haven't told anyone else this story. I don't think anyone would believe me anyway, especially none of my skeptic Dutch family. All in all though, despite knowing that that thing does not want me there, I want to go back, and I plan on heading back there soon. Number 4. Stalked by a werewolf while on drugs. Submitted by Joshua. I live in Birmingham, England, and I'm 15 years old. I belong to a group of friends whose favorite ways to pass the time are with hard drugs and other illegal activities. We're all pretty much train wrecks, to be honest. I've always been skeptical about the existence of creatures such as the ones I witnessed later in the story, but this experience has certainly changed the way I look at the world we live in. This story took place about 2 weeks ago at the time of writing. Me and 6 other friends of mine were going to our friend's house. It would be 8 of us in total. Her parents and siblings were not home. So as you can imagine, our entertainment for the evening came in the form of 2 grams of Amsterdam's finest and a few little bags of pretty and colorful pills. We had over 100 pounds, not the measurement, or $120 worth of MDMA, which we would use to throw our lives further into the deep abyss of substance abuse. But enough about our crappy life choices, and don't do drugs, kids. 4 of us, myself included, had already smoked some of the weed earlier that day, and the other half of us had taken some of the ecstasy earlier that day as well. After a few hours had passed, we all had come down from our respective highs, and so the 6 of my friends indoors decided to redose, all taking a whole pill of ecstasy. Me and one of my female friends, we'll call her Jade, were outside having a smoke and deep personal conversation. It's important to mention that, as we wouldn't be going back inside for another half hour after everyone else. Now, for those unfamiliar with MDMA, it takes about an hour to fully kick in. The next 30 minutes go by uneventfully until I received a call from my mother, who was hysterical about my sister, who, ironically, had taken some kind of drug, which had my mom freaking out and wanted me to come help to calm her down soon. I obviously wasn't going to ignore the call. Even though I would be really high by the time I got home, I decided to bite the bullet and just go. God forbid anything happened to my sister. It's now 12 at night and in the middle of winter, so it's pitch black outside, and I'm making my way back from my friend's house when I encounter a problem. This was the first time I'd ever been to this particular friend's house, and we arrived during the day. It was now in the middle of the night, and the roads are poorly lit, and I come to realize that every one of them I encounter looks almost identical. That's great, because now I'm freaking lost. Paranoia starts to kick in as every small insignificant sound I hear freaks me out. I'm not a big dude, maybe 5'8", and I'm not in any way muscular, so I feel incredibly vulnerable as I poorly navigate the dark, cold, and eerily empty streets, praying I don't encounter anyone with ill intentions. But what I saw next was way worse than anything I could have possibly imagined I would see in my life. Standing on the opposite side of the street in a small alleyway that separated 2 houses stood a tall silhouette of a creature engulfed in darkness. All I could see were 2 beady eyes staring at me under the cover of the shadows. Based on its silhouette, it must have been at least 7.5 feet tall. It had an intimidatingly wide chest, with long arms that appeared to be both muscular and scrawny at the same time, legs that were small in proportion to its enlarged torso, but they were in no way small for a humanoid figure. All of these details I could vaguely distinguish from the darkness as we both stood there, frozen in motion and staring directly at one another. It might have just been 10 seconds, but it felt like forever. This continued until it slowly took a step out of the shade, closer to the glow of a nearby street lamp, and as it revealed itself, my heart sank in my chest. Staring back at me was a man-like beast with close resemblance to a wolf, or what I could only think of at the time, a werewolf. Its entire body was covered in thick black hair, its face extended forward to form a long appendage like that of a dog's jaw, and those arms were now in full view, revealing human-like hands with long claws at the end. The thing's face looked only confused or curious at first, which gave me a very small sense of security, although I was still terrified, to say the least. I slowly stepped backwards, maintaining eye contact with this creature, as its head slowly followed me as I moved. It just stood there, motionless, with the same expression as it watched me walk in reverse, without watching where I was going. Because of this and the fear I fell backwards into a fence, causing a loud banging sound. At that very moment, I knew I screwed up. I watched this animal's demeanor suddenly change from harmless curiosity to complete and utter rage as its eyebrows raised, its head tilted further down to better face me, and its lips reared back in the form of a snarl, revealing a row of long, yellow teeth. It released a quiet growl and took one slow step towards me, like it was taunting me, letting me know that it had all the time in the world because it could catch me anytime, anywhere, in a heartbeat. My obvious reaction is to get the heck out of there. I had been away from my friend's house for about 10 minutes, probably going in circles, so I knew I couldn't be far, and that became my destination. I legged it back the way I came, trying my hardest to retrace my steps, frequently looking behind me to see if that thing was following me. To no surprise, I saw it every time, matching my speed while keeping a careful distance as if to mock me, or to torture me with more fear before killing me, just because it could. Luckily for me though, MDMA just so happens to give users an increase in energy. I'm glad that this animal was overconfident enough to let me outrun it for a while. As I reached a familiar sight, I now finally recognized the street I was on, and from there, I was a mere 30 seconds away from the house. I made as many turns as I could until I reached my friend's street, where I was sheer meters away from her house. Before entering, I turned around to ensure that the creature was not in sight. It wasn't, because I had just turned a corner, but I could hear its loud footsteps closing in on me, so I quickly bolted inside the house. I shut that door as quickly and quietly as humanly possible, and almost broke down on the spot. I now faced my next big problem. Everyone was off their rockers. The drugs had kicked in for everyone else, and would soon kick in for me too. It had been about 15 minutes since I left, meaning they would certainly be kicking in within the next 10 minutes, and I too would be going nuts. A million different things raced through my head in 10 seconds. I stood with my back against the door, catching my breath, until I was brought back to reality by the sound of my friend's laughter in the living room, and the alarming realization that the door was unlocked when I came in, prompting me to remember that the keys were lost earlier in the